patient has severe internal bleeding, and his blood pressure is dropping. We need to start medication immediately. The blood bank is running low on type A, go get more. The voices were muffled, as if coming through a thick layer of cotton. Couldn't hear, couldn't see. I could only feel my life slipping away, bit by bit. The ER doors were thrown open. My wife, Veronica, her tall figure silhouetted in the doorway. Behind her stood Julian, his face a ghostly white. The car crash, we were both in it. Ms. Vance, we only have one dose, the doctor exclaimed, holding up a specialized imported drug. His forehead was beaded with sweat, his voice so strained it sounded like it might snap. Mr. King has massive internal bleeding. We have to use this to stop the hemorrhage now. If we wait any longer, he's really… Veronica's gaze swept over my ashen face, cold and indifferent, not lingering for a second. It landed directly on Julian, who was being propped up by a nurse, sobbing softly. Julian, how are you? Where are you hurt? Her voice held a tenderness and anxiety I had never heard before. Julian shook his head weakly. I'm fine, Veronica. You should go check on Leo. He looks like he's hurt really bad. But the hand clutching the hem of her coat didn't loosen its grip in the slightest. Doctor, the other gentleman just has some superficial wounds, but he's in shock. He needs to be monitored, too, another nurse added. Everyone's eyes were fixed on Veronica, awaiting her life or death verdict. My heart, along with that tiny vial of medicine, hung suspended in midair. I knew it then. The 5 years I'd loved her, the 3 years I'd been married to her, all 8 of those years were worth less to her than a single one of Julian's tears. He was the one that got away, the great unrequited love of her youth. And I, Leo King, was just the husband she'd settled for after a cold calculation of pros and cons. My consciousness began to fade, the only sound the frantic, accelerating beep of the heart monitor. Just as I thought I was about to fall into an endless darkness, Veronica's icy voice cut through the noise like a poison-tipped dagger, stabbing precisely into my heart. Give it to him, she said, pointing at Julian without a flicker of hesitation. In that instant, the world seemed to stop. I saw the stunned look on the doctor's face, the nurse's incredulous eyes, and the flash of triumph in Julian's. My heart died. So, in her world, I didn't even have the right to be chosen. My life wasn't as important as Julian suffering a little shock. The physical pain was suddenly eclipsed by the numbness in my chest. I even managed to twitch my lips, wanting to laugh at my own 8 years of stupidity. But Veronica's next words crushed the last shred of my dignity. Also, she said, turning to give a cold command to the assistant behind her, freeze all of Leo King's credit cards immediately, and have the legal department prepare the divorce papers. The assistant froze for a second, clearly not expecting such an order at a time like this. Ms. Vance, Mr. King's condition. Just do it. Veronica's voice was devoid of warmth. The market took a hit from this crash. We need capital to stabilize it. His money might as well be put to good use. So that was it. She didn't just want me dead. As I was hanging by a thread, she wanted to take everything from me, using my money to cover the business losses her little incident had caused. I closed my eyes. A single hot tear slid from the corner of my eye, mixing with the blood on my temple. The line on the monitor began to jump erratically before flatlining with a piercing tone. Before losing consciousness completely, I used my last ounce of strength to reach for the phone under my pillow, the one I had always treasured. The contact saved as Veronica. I hadn't gotten a call through to that number in 3 years. Veronica, you win. You killed the Leo who loved you, but you'll soon find out exactly what you've lost. Darkness enveloped me like an endless ocean, cold and suffocating. I thought I would sink into it and sleep forever, but a powerful will to live, like a stubborn blade of grass, tenaciously pulled me back from the brink of death. When I regained consciousness, I was still in a hospital bed, but my surroundings had changed. It was no longer a chaotic ER, but a quiet, almost luxurious private room. The sterile, nauseating smell of disinfectant had been replaced by a faint, clean fragrance. I strained to move my eyes and saw the monitors beside me displaying stable vital signs. I wasn't dead. You're awake? A deep, familiar voice sounded by my ear. I followed the sound and saw a tall, imposing figure standing by the window. He was wearing a crisp military uniform, the stars on his epaulets gleaming in the fading sunlight. He turned, revealing a handsome, sharply defined face. "Jax," I said, my voice as hoarse as if it had been scraped with sandpaper. Jax strode to my bedside, his deep eyes swirling with emotions I couldn't decipher. Concern, anger, all of it finally melting into a helpless sigh. He reached out and gently felt my forehead, a gesture completely at odds with his stern demeanor. "Good, the fever's broken." He pulled his hand back, his tone tinged with reproach. "Leo, you've really outdone yourself. Getting into this state. How long were you planning on hiding this from me?" I tried to force a smile, but it looked worse than a grimace. I thought I could handle it. Handle it? By ending up in the ER, waiting for someone to do you the favor of giving you a life-saving drug? Jax's voice turned sharp and cold, and the temperature in the room seemed to drop a few degrees. "If I'd been 10 minutes later, where would you be right now? Have you thought about that?" I fell silent. Of course I had. If he hadn't arrived in time, I'd probably be a cold corpse, my last bit of value squeezed dry by Veronica even in death. "I'm sorry." I lowered my head, unable to meet his gaze. Jax stared at me for a long time before finally softening. He pulled over a chair and sat down, his voice gentler. "The doctor said you lost a lot of blood and need to rest. Don't think about anything. Just focus on getting better." I nodded, but my eyes began to burn uncontrollably. In this world, besides him, there was no one else who genuinely cared if I lived or died. "What about Veronica?" I asked softly. At the mention of her name, Jax's eyes became as sharp as knives. "Her? She's probably busy comforting her precious first love and calculating how much my accidental death will benefit her company." A pang of pain shot through me, even though my heart was already dead. Hearing the truth laid so bare still sent a chill down my spine. "She froze my cards. And she wants a divorce," I said, my voice so calm it surprised even me. Jax let out a cold laugh, his tone dripping with contempt. "A divorce? She wishes. Leo, you need to remember this. It's not about her divorcing you. It's about you making her pay for what she's done." He stood up and walked to the window, his back to me. His voice was low but carried an undeniable power. "Get some rest. When you're better, we'll go home. As for Veronica and her pathetic little empire, I'll make her understand what she can touch and what she can never, ever afford to." I looked at his broad back, the military uniform a suit of impenetrable armor shielding me from all the storms. 3 years ago, for the sake of what I called love, I ignored his objections and insisted on marrying Veronica, even cutting off contact with him. I thought I had found a safe harbor for life, but it was just a trap coated in sugar. Now that the dream was over and my heart was shattered, I finally knew who would always have my back. I closed my eyes, swallowing all my weakness and tears. "Jax," I said, reopening my eyes with newfound resolve. "I'm not letting this go." Jax turned, a hint of approval flashing in his eyes. "Now that sounds like my brother." "I don't just want a divorce," I said clearly, enunciating every word. "I want to leave her with nothing. Yes, nothing. This wasn't just for me, it was for the foolish love that had died. I would make Veronica watch as the very thing she had discarded for profit and a past lover turned out to be more precious than she could ever imagine. I would make her pay a price for her choice today, a price she absolutely could not afford." It wasn't until noon the next day that Veronica finally remembered me, her legal husband. After dealing with Julian's post-traumatic stress and spending the morning in emergency meetings to stabilize the company stock that had dipped after the accident, she finally, at her assistant's reminder, came to the public hospital where I had been. She pushed open the door, but the man she expected to find clinging to life and awaiting her mercy wasn't there. The room was empty, the bed made with crisp precision, as if it had never been occupied. Veronica's brow furrowed, an unfamiliar sense of irritation rising within her. She hated not being in control. Where is he? She snapped at the assistant trailing her. The assistant looked clueless. Ms. Vance, I don't know. You told me to handle Mr. Julian's situation yesterday, so I didn't follow up on Mr. King's. Veronica's face darkened as she strode to the nurse's station. The patient in room 203, Leo King? She rapped on the counter, her tone carrying its usual air of command. The head nurse was organizing patient files. She looked up, a flicker of surprise and distance on her face. The drama outside the ER yesterday had become the talk of the entire department. Oh, Ms. Vance, the nurse said, slowly putting down her clipboard and adjusting her glasses. Your husband was transferred out about half an hour ago. A senior military officer came to pick him up. It was a top-level transfer, with a direct escort from the military's main hospital. You didn't know? Veronica was stunned. Senior military officer, top-level transfer, main military hospital. The words felt absurd. She had thoroughly investigated Leo's background, parents deceased, with only a distant aunt living abroad. When did he suddenly acquire such a powerful military connection? What was his name? What unit is he from? Veronica pressed, her voice urgent. I'm sorry, Ms. Vance. The officer presented special credentials. We have no authority to inquire, and we are required to maintain confidentiality, the nurse replied professionally, though a glint of amusement was hidden in her eyes. But from the look of things, his rank must be quite high. With someone like that looking after your husband, you can rest assured. Rest assured? Veronica only felt the nameless fire in her gut burn hotter. Leo, the man who had always been so obedient, who barely dared to speak loudly in her presence, had dared to leave with another man without a word? And right after she had issued her divorce ultimatum? This was a blatant challenge to her authority. Ms. Vance, should we still try to find out which hospital he was transferred to? The assistant asked cautiously. Find him. You find him now, Veronica said, practically through gritted teeth. I want to see who gave him the guts. A hazy memory surfaced. 3 years ago, at their wedding, there had been a young man in a military uniform who had handed Leo over to her with a grim expression. At the time, she had dismissed him as one of the groom's unimportant relatives and paid him no mind. Could it be him? Veronica then gave a self-deprecating laugh. Impossible. How could an ordinary soldier have that kind of power? It must just be some deadbeat friend Leo found, putting on a show to scare her. At that thought, the anger in her eyes was tinged with jealousy. Perhaps, she said, turning to her assistant, have the divorce papers expedited. As for the division of assets, make sure he leaves with nothing. She would show Leo that without Veronica Vance, he was nothing. She'd like to see just how long that so-called military officer could protect him. However, Veronica had no idea that her formidable intelligence network, when faced with the name Jax, was like a flimsy fishing net, unable to catch a single piece of useful information. In one afternoon, her assistant made dozens of calls and leveraged every connection, only to come back with a single sentence. Ms. Vance, his identity is classified top secret. We don't have the clearance to access it. Sitting in her penthouse office overlooking the entire city, Veronica felt a true chill for the first time. She looked out at the glittering urban nightscape, and everything she once held firmly in her grasp now seemed illusory. And she had no idea that a silent war against her had already begun. Returning to the villa that was supposed to be a home but felt more like a cold cage, Veronica's unease intensified. Without my presence, the place felt unnervingly empty. The faint scent of cedarwood I always used seemed to linger in the air, a subtle but pervasive reminder that the man of the house was gone. She irritably tore off her silk scarf and went straight up to the master bedroom on the second floor. This had once been our room, but now it held only her scent. She pulled open the closet. All of my clothes had vanished, leaving only her expensive, monotonous collection of women's business suits. Her gaze finally fell on the display case in the bedroom. Two was empty. Where my watch collection and various knickknacks once sat, now only a single, solitary cufflink remained, resting quietly in a velvet jewelry box. Veronica walked over and picked up the cufflink. It had a classic design, made from a dark, heavy metal of indeterminate material. It was surprisingly heavy in her hand. The surface was engraved with a peculiar crest, what looked like a soaring eagle perched atop a majestic mountain. The lines were intricate and elegant, exuding an ancient, mysterious aura. I had once told her it was a family heirloom from my grandfather, my most prized possession. At the time, she was at the peak of her success, fresh off a major business deal, and had sneered at such sentimentality. She remembered her exact words. "Leo, you have to look forward. It's just a worn-out old cufflink. What's there to treasure? I'll buy you a dozen from Vacheron Constantine someday, worth way more than this." He had just smiled then, not arguing, but she had clearly seen the disappointment in his eyes. Now, as Veronica traced the cold lines of the crest, an unfamiliar feeling stirred within her. She recalled the officer's icy glare at the wedding, the head nurse's words about the mysterious top-level transfer. An absurd thought wormed its way into her mind. Could this cufflink be connected to that officer? She immediately shook her head, telling herself she was overthinking it. Leo's background was as clean as a blank sheet of paper. How could he possibly be linked to some mysterious, powerful figure? This was all just a smokescreen he'd set up to get a bigger settlement in the divorce. At that thought, any warmth in her eyes vanished, replaced by an even thicker layer of disgust and disdain. She irritably swept the cufflink into a drawer with a clatter, as if it were something filthy. "Leo King, you'd better hope I don't find out what you're up to," she said coldly to the empty room. She took out her phone and dialed her chief legal counsel. "Mr. Warren, what's the status of the divorce agreement?" "Ms. Vance, it's been drafted, but regarding the division of assets, I don't care what methods you use." Veronica cut him off, her tone leaving no room for argument. "I want him to leave with nothing. Also, I need you to investigate someone for me, an army officer, the one who picked up Leo King. Use every resource you have. I want to know everything about him." She believed that once she stripped me of everything, I would come crawling back to her cage like a bird with broken wings. She believed that the name Veronica Vance was my only ticket to survival in this city. But she would soon discover just how wrong she was. Over the next few days, she mobilized all her contacts and resources, yet she couldn't uncover a single piece of information about the man named Jax. All leads pointed to a vague codename, Kylan. The codename was like an impenetrable wall, blocking all her attempts at investigation. Every time she thought she was getting close to the core, she was forcefully repelled by an invisible power. Her friends and partners, who had once seemed omnipotent, all fell silent at the mention of Kylan. Some even cryptically advised her to stop digging. "Veronica, take my advice," one of her most trusted business mentors told her over the phone, his voice heavy. "There are some circles we can't touch. Whatever misunderstanding you have with your husband, resolve it peacefully. Don't provoke people you shouldn't just because you're angry." Veronica hung up, her face as dark as a thundercloud. For the first time, the world she had so firmly believed in began to feel unstable. While Veronica was getting nowhere with the codename Kylan, a real storm was quietly gathering over her business empire. On Monday, at the market open, Vance Industries stock began to fall without warning. At first, Veronica wasn't concerned. The market was a battlefield, normal fluctuations were to be expected. She was confident she could stabilize the situation with her usual savvy. However, events quickly spun out of her control. The stock's decline wasn't a technical correction, it was a sustained, precise, one-way plunge, as if guided by an invisible hand. Every time she deployed capital to prop up the price, an even larger sell order would slam down at the exact same moment, wiping out all her efforts. Panic began to spread through the market. Rumors about Vance Industries' tight cash flow and failing core projects spread like a virus through various channels. Veronica sat in the trading room, her eyes bloodshot, staring at the relentless downward slope of the green line on the screen. She knew this wasn't the market at work. Someone was targeting her, hunting her in a premeditated attack. "Find them. I want to know who's shorting us," she roared in the conference room, her usual calm and composure gone. But the result was the same as her investigation into Kylan. The opponent's account information was layered in encryption, hidden behind a vast network of offshore companies spanning the globe. They were like a ghost lurking in the deep sea, invisible, but their lethal chill was unmistakable. In just 3 days, Vance Industries lost nearly $3 billion in market value. Veronica was overwhelmed and exhausted. She hadn't slept in days, and a palpable cloud of pressure surrounded her. Just then, Julian called. "Veronica." His signature weak voice came through the phone. "I'm so scared. Some men just came to my apartment. They said they were sent by your business rivals, and they told me to stay away from you." Veronica's heart tightened. "Julian, don't be afraid. I'll send someone to protect you right away," she said, trying to soothe him. "Veronica, do you think it could be Leo?" Julian's voice was filled with a mix of hurt and well-intentioned speculation. "I know he hates me, and he hates you for choosing me. Do you think he's lashing out? That this is his revenge?" Veronica's mind went blank. Of course, how could she not have thought of it? Leo, the man who had disappeared. The timing was too perfect. The moment he was gone, Vance Industries started to crumble. And that mysterious army officer, he had to be the muscle Leo had found. Revenge born from a spurned love? A cold smile touched Veronica's lips. She had always thought Leo was a gentle lamb, but she'd forgotten that even a cornered rabbit will bite. "Fine, very fine." She hung up, her eyes turning vicious. "Leo King, I underestimated you. You think finding a backer means you can fight me? We'll see how long you and your pretty boy last." The lie, so carefully crafted by Julian, had perfectly targeted Veronica's arrogant blind spot. She would rather believe this was my jealous, crazed revenge than admit she might have provoked an entity she truly couldn't afford to fight. She blamed all her anger and resentment on me. In her mind, if she could just find me and force me to submit, this crisis would be resolved. She began a frantic search for me, even resorting to some shady, gray area methods. But all her efforts were like stones dropped into the ocean. It was as if I had vanished from the face of the earth, leaving no trace behind. And the invisible hand shorting her company showed no signs of stopping. Vance Industries, once a mighty flagship in the corporate world, was now visibly hurtling toward an iceberg. Panic, for the first time, truly seized Veronica's heart. To save her teetering company, Veronica had to swallow her pride and attend a top-tier business summit in Geneva, bringing Julian along in a posture of near humiliation. The summit brought together the world's most elite financiers and industry titans. Veronica's objective was clear. She had to find allies and secure a lifeline of funding to weather the financial storm directed at her. She forced herself to stay composed, weaving through the glamorous, high-powered crowd, exchanging pleasantries and toasts with every tycoon who might be her potential savior. Julian, like a docile canary, clung elegantly to her arm, playing the role of her supportive, understanding confidant. However, she quickly sensed that something was off. The same business leaders who used to greet her with wide smiles were now treating her with a subtle, deliberate distance. No one was willing to engage in deep conversation, let alone discuss investments. The way they looked at her was as if they were watching a loser about to be kicked out of the game. Veronica's heart sank. She knew the news of her crisis had already spread through this circle. The world of capital was brutally pragmatic. When you're down, everyone wants to give you a push. Just as she was feeling a wave of helplessness, a commotion erupted at the entrance. A silver-haired, vigorous elderly man entered, surrounded by a phalanx of bodyguards in black suits. "It's Mr. Rothschild. My God, even the Wolf of Wall Street is here." A low murmur of astonishment rippled through the crowd. Veronica's own heart skipped a beat. This Mr. Rothschild was a legendary international finance mogul, a man who could make global capital markets tremble with a single stomp of his foot. If she could win his favor, the crisis at Vance Industries would be over. Veronica smoothed her suit jacket, about to go and try her luck, when her eyes accidentally fell on a pin on the old man's lapel. It was a peculiar crest, a soaring eagle perched atop a majestic mountain. Veronica's pupils constricted, and her breath caught in her throat. That crest. She had seen it before. It was identical. Identical to the one on the cufflink she had swept from my display case into a drawer. An idea so absurd it made her laugh at herself flooded her mind. Could Leo be connected to this financial titan? No. Impossible. She immediately shot down the thought. Leo was just an orphan. How could he possibly know someone of this caliber? It had to be a coincidence. There were plenty of similar crests in the world. She forcibly suppressed the turmoil in her heart, attributing it to the immense stress she'd been under. Just then, the summit's host stepped onto the stage, his voice trembling with excitement. Ladies and gentlemen, please give your warmest welcome to our summit's largest sponsor and the representative of Kylan Capital, a firm that has recently taken the financial world by storm. Kylan Capital? Veronica's body went rigid. The name was a sledgehammer to her heart. Wasn't that the mysterious fund that had been shorting her company? She stared at the stage, desperate to see the face of the rival who had pushed her to the brink. She watched as, under the glare of the spotlights, a tall, imposing figure slowly emerged from backstage. He wore a crisp military uniform, the stars on his shoulders glinting with a cold light. His stride was steady and powerful, each step landing like a drumbeat on Veronica's heart. When the man stepped fully into the light, revealing a familiar, cold face, Veronica felt the blood freeze in her veins. It was him, the officer from the wedding who had handed Leo over to her. The man the head nurse had described. But what plunged her into an icy abyss was the sight of a cufflink on his immaculate uniform. A cufflink bearing the same crest of an eagle and a mountain, silently declaring a truth she could not accept. The entire ballroom fell into a strange silence the moment Jax appeared. All eyes were on the man in the military uniform, whose presence was so powerful it was suffocating. A high-ranking military officer at a business summit was unusual enough, but he was also the representative of Kylan Capital, the firm that had been roiling the markets. Standing in the crowd, Veronica felt as though she had been struck by an invisible bolt of lightning, her body frozen and stiff. All her wishful thinking and self-delusion shattered into dust the moment Jax appeared. The man she had always looked down on as Julian's pretty boy rival, the minor character she thought she could manipulate, was the true king of this poker game. Jax stood at the center of the stage but didn't begin to speak as everyone expected. His deep gaze, like a pair of precision radars, slowly swept across the hall, finally landing with flawless accuracy on Veronica. What kind of look was that? There was no anger, no hatred, only a pure, condescending coldness. It was the look one gives an ant, a creature from a completely different dimension. Under that gaze, Veronica felt as if she had been stripped naked. All her pathetic desperation laid bare. Her pride, her wealth, her status, all of it seemed laughable in that moment. Julian, beside her, had clearly recognized Jax as well. His face went chalk white, and his hand clutching her arm tightened unconsciously, his body trembling slightly. Veronica, what is he doing here? Veronica didn't answer him. Her mind was a blank slate, filled only with the image of Jax's cold eyes. She had been living inside a massive lie. She thought she had married a clinging vine who needed her to survive, but she had unknowingly welcomed a sleeping lion into her home, a lion she could never afford to provoke. And the one who had awakened this lion was her own foolishness and arrogance. Kylan Capital, Kylan. She finally understood the meaning of the codename. It was a mythical beast, a symbol of royalty and power, and she, a mere mortal, had dared to challenge its majesty. Jax didn't stay on stage for long. His presence alone was the most powerful statement he could make. He simply stood there for a few seconds, his gaze plunging the entire room into a tense silence. Then, with a slight nod, he turned and walked off stage, flanked by his bodyguards. He hadn't said a word, but his actions were more devastating than any speech. He had shown everyone in the room. Veronica Vance, the former rising star of the business world, was out. As Jax departed, the suffocating atmosphere in the ballroom eased slightly, only to erupt into a frenzy of whispers. All the gossip now centered on Veronica and her feud with Kylan Capital. So Vance Industries pissed off a conglomerate with military backing. No wonder they're going down so hard. I heard it has something to do with her husband. Some kind of rich family drama. Shh, keep your voice down. Don't get involved. The business colleagues who had once flocked to Veronica's side now distanced themselves as if she were carrying a plague. She stood rooted to the spot, feeling like an abandoned island surrounded by a cold sea of gawking onlookers. Her legendary pride was utterly shattered. The post-summit gala became a public execution for Veronica. She moved like a zombie, mechanically holding a wine glass, but no one approached her to talk. She became an invisible pariah in the banquet hall, everyone instinctively giving her a wide berth. Julian stuck close to her, his face pale, the terror in his eyes no longer concealable. He finally realized that his life-saving leverage and first love status were utterly worthless in the face of absolute power. He had provoked a being he wasn't even qualified to look up to. Just as Veronica was about to flee the suffocating gala with Julian, Jax's figure appeared before her again. This time, he wasn't an untouchable king on a stage but a judge standing right in front of her. Beside him was the financial mogul, Mr. Rothschild, and the two were chatting in low tones. Veronica's heart clenched. There was no escape. She forced a smile that was uglier than a grimace and steeled herself to walk toward them. Mr. Jax, Mr. Rothschild, it's an honor. She raised her glass, trying to project an air of calm. But Jax didn't even spare her a glance. He simply turned slightly and, in a familiar peer-to-peer tone, introduced her to Rothschild. Mr. Rothschild, let me introduce you. This is Ms. Vance. He paused, every word a sledgehammer to Veronica's nerves. My brother Leo King's ex-wife. Brother? Ex-wife? The words exploded like a bomb in Veronica's ears. The wine glass slipped from her hand and shattered on the floor, the red liquid splashing across her expensive dress. But she didn't notice. The entire banquet hall, upon hearing those words, once again fell deathly silent. Every eye in the room, filled with shock, pity, and a touch of schadenfreude, was fixed on Veronica. The man she had abandoned was the brother of this military powerhouse? Veronica Vance was the clueless, overreaching clown who had usurped his place? A look of understanding crossed Mr. Rothschild's face. He glanced at the disheveled Veronica, then smiled at Jax. Jax, it seems this Ms. Vance has poor judgment. Mistaking a diamond for a piece of glass is a costly mistake for anyone in business. Their conversation was a series of sharp knives, slicing away what was left of Veronica's dignity. She wanted to argue, to scream, to ask Jax what right he had to say that Leo was her husband, but Jax gave her no chance. He took out his phone, and the screen lit up, displaying a photo in crystal clear detail. In the picture, I was wearing an oversized hospital gown. My face was still pale, but my features were relaxed with a long-lost sense of peace. I was asleep, my head resting in the crook of Jax's arm, while he looked down at me, his gaze focused and adoring. It was a look of complete trust and dependence, something Veronica had never seen in my eyes. He's doing very well now. Jax put his phone away. His voice wasn't loud, but it carried across the silent hall. Ms. Vance, you're not worthy. Those 4 words shattered Veronica's last line of defense. She staggered back a step, her face as white as a sheet. She finally understood. She hadn't just lost a husband or a business empire. She had lost an entire world that could have been hers, a world she had personally pushed away. The day after the summit, the final reckoning began. Vance Industries, the ship that had once sailed so proudly on the corporate seas, met its doom. At 9 o'clock on Monday morning, the moment the stock market opened, a torrent of massive sell orders rained down from the sky, a meteor shower of precise, merciless blows against the company's stock. The price hit its lower limit instantly with no chance to fight back. Veronica sat in her office, not having slept all night. She tried to mobilize every dollar she could to defend the stock, but her meager funds were like a praying mantis trying to stop a tank against the behemoth of Kylan Capital. She was instantly crushed. Panic erupted. At 9:30 a.m., Vance Industries' largest partner, the Kristoff family from Europe, unilaterally terminated all contracts and demanded immediate repayment of a $5 billion breach of contract penalty. At 10 a.m., the country's three largest commercial banks simultaneously issued payment demands, requiring Vance Industries to repay all outstanding loans, a total of $8 billion, within 24 hours. At 11 a.m., a carefully orchestrated mutiny unfolded within the company. The entire Core RD team, led by the chief technology officer, submitted their resignations en masse. A second later, a rival company announced with great fanfare that it had successfully hired the entire team, at triple their previous salaries. Bad news kept pouring in, each report another nail in the coffin of Vance Industries. Veronica's phone blew up with calls from creditors, partners terminating contracts, angry investors, and rivals kicking her while she was down. The business partners she had once called friends were now baying for her blood. "Ms. Vance, our partnership is over. Veronica, pay up now or we'll see you in court." "You, Vance? Who the hell did you piss off? Don't drag us down with you." She mechanically answered, explained, and made promises, but it was useless. The dominoes had fallen, and nothing could stop the collapse. She finally understood that Jax had no need for complex schemes. All he had to do was announce to the world, "Veronica Vance is the one I'm taking down," and the entire world would become the weapon in his hand. By the afternoon, the office was in a state of panic. Employees began packing their belongings, ready to find new jobs. A sense of impending doom filled the massive office building. Veronica sat slumped in her executive chair, staring out the window. She had once thought that from this vantage point, she could control the world. Now she realized she was just a pawn on someone else's board, one that could be discarded at any moment. She thought of me. She desperately wanted to contact me, to question me, to beg me. She felt that if she could just find me, if I would just plead her case, there might be a sliver of hope. She dialed my number, only to hear the cold, robotic voice of the service provider. "We're sorry. The number you have dialed has been disconnected or is no longer in service." She tried countless other numbers, but the result was the same. Texts, emails, social media. Every channel I had ever used to contact her was now blocked. She was trapped in a transparent glass box, able to see the outside world, but completely unable to connect with it. Despair washed over her like a tidal wave. She collapsed in her chair, staring blankly at the ceiling. She had lost. She had lost completely, and she didn't even understand why. She had no idea of the terrifying power her opponent wielded. All she knew was that it all stemmed from one cold decision outside an emergency room. Just when Veronica thought she had hit rock bottom, that things couldn't possibly get worse, reality slapped her again, harder. What awaited her wasn't bankruptcy, but something far more humiliating: total dispossession. The next morning, as Veronica walked into the office that would soon no longer be hers, she saw her chief counsel, Mr. Warren, sitting dejectedly on the sofa. A thick stack of documents was piled on the coffee table in front of him. "Warren, what's the situation? Is there anything we can do?" Veronica asked, grasping at the last straw. Mr. Warren looked up, his face pale, his eyes as empty as a puppet's. He didn't answer her question, just trembled and said in a dazed, dreamlike voice, "Ms. Vance, we're finished." "What do you mean?" Veronica's heart sank. "We were wrong from the very beginning," Mr. Warren said, his voice cracking. "Vance Industries, it was never yours." Veronica looked at him as if he'd lost his mind. "Warren, has the stress gotten to you? I founded this company with my own two hands. How could it not be mine?" Shaking his head, Mr. Warren pointed a trembling finger at the documents on the table. "Look at these. Just look at these and you'll understand." Hesitantly, Veronica picked up the top document. It was a core technology patent transfer agreement she had never seen before. On it, all of Vance Industries' essential, life-sustaining technologies were legally and irrevocably transferred to an offshore company registered in the Cayman Islands. She kept flipping. Exclusive distribution agreements for overseas sales channels, the deed to the corporate headquarters building, even the ownership of the Vance trademark itself. Everything, every single cornerstone of her business empire, had been transferred to that mysterious offshore company without her knowledge. And the signing dates on these documents spanned the entire 10 years since she had started her business. Veronica's body began to tremble uncontrollably. A cold sweat soaked through her silk blouse. "No, what is this? These documents are fake," she shrieked, her voice sharp with terror. They're not fake," Mr. Warren said, closing his eyes in despair. "Every document has your authentic signature, authenticated by the most reputable notaries. They're all real." When had she signed these things? Veronica's mind was a chaotic mess. They were in the addendums of every angel investment contract, Mr. Warren whispered, his voice barely audible. "Ms. Vance, do you remember? From your earliest startup days to every subsequent expansion, there was always a mysterious angel investor supporting you. We always thought you were just lucky." Of course, Veronica remembered. She had always considered that investor, who never appeared in person and only communicated through lawyers, to be her guardian angel, her fated benefactor. Who is he?" Veronica's voice was filled with dread. Mr. Warren shakily delivered the answer that would haunt her for the rest of her life. We were a proxy company from the start. We were just managing the business for the real owner." Proxy company. Those words seared themselves into Veronica's soul like a red-hot brand. Her celebrated business acumen, her self-made success story, the empire she had built over 10 years, it was all a joke. She wasn't a queen, she was just a glorified custodian hired to watch over a treasure vault. Just as Veronica's worldview was completely shattered and her mind was on the verge of collapse, her personal cell phone rang. It was an unknown number. She answered it numbly. A cold, steady voice came through the receiver. The voice of Jax. A voice she would never forget. "Ms. Vance." The hand holding the phone trembled like a leaf in an autumn wind. "It was you. You did all of this." She managed to choke out. On the other end, Jax let out a soft, almost mocking laugh. "Me?" he said. "Ms. Vance, I think you're mistaken. I'm just taking back what has always belonged to my brother." "Your brother? Leo?" Veronica's voice was laced with disbelief and outrage. "That's impossible. He's just an orphan. Where would he?" "It seems you never knew him at all." Jax cut her off, a hint of pity in his tone. "The Vance Industries you were so proud of was nothing more than a little sandbox Leo's family set up for him to learn the ropes. Your empire was built on his foundation. And you, Ms. Vance, were simply a manager we hired on a trial basis." "A manager on a trial basis." Veronica muttered the words, collapsing to the floor. All her pride and arrogance were obliterated in that single moment. "Your lease is up." Jax's voice was the final judgment. The call ended. The office was deathly silent. Veronica lay on the cold floor, staring blankly at the magnificent crystal chandelier on the ceiling. It had once been the symbol of her success, now it was a colossal mockery of her foolishness and ignorance. She thought of the cufflink she had carelessly tossed into a drawer. It wasn't some grandfather's heirloom. It was the King family crest, the true logo of this vast business empire. She thought of the business advice I had casually given her over the years. It wasn't the insight of someone from a wealthy family, it was the directives from the true owner, relayed through his overseer. She thought of the time I had asked her if, one day, she had nothing, would I still stay by her side? How had she answered? She had said, "I, Veronica Vance, will never have nothing." How laughable. Not only did she have nothing, she had never truly owned anything at all. She had lost. She had lost to her own arrogance, to her own blindness. She had personally pushed away the most precious treasure in the world, smugly believing she was choosing a shinier piece of glass. Ha ha ha. Veronica suddenly started to laugh. The laughter grew louder, more frantic, until it morphed into hysterical, gut-wrenching sobs. She wept like a lost child in the empty shell of a kingdom she had built but never owned. As Veronica was consumed by her self-inflicted agony, the office door was thrown open with a bang. Several uniformed police officers walked in grimly. "Veronica Vance?" the lead officer said, showing his badge. "We have reason to believe your business associate, Julian, is involved in a case of intentional injury and commercial fraud. Please come with us to assist in the investigation." Veronica looked up blankly, her mind unable to process this new blow. "Julian? What happened to him?" "During our investigation of a car accident," the officer stated matter-of-factly, "we found that Mr. Julian is under significant suspicion of fabricating evidence and maliciously causing the accident. Furthermore, he is also suspected of colluding with foreign hedge funds to illegally profit by shorting Vance Industries stock, using the market panic caused by the crash." Veronica's pupils contracted violently. The crash was Julian's design? Even shorting her company was his doing? She had always believed Julian was a pure, innocent white lotus, a younger brother who needed her protection. She never imagined that the most venomous snake was hiding beneath that flower. She remembered Julian's perfectly timed gasps of pain and his feigned weakness after the crash. She remembered his well-intentioned suggestion in the hospital, shifting all the blame onto him. All along, she had been just a pawn in his game. He had used her guilt and affection not only to try to eliminate me, the rightful husband, but also to carve out a piece of her company's ruins for himself. Such a brilliant scheme, such a vicious heart. No, impossible. Veronica shook her head, dazed. If all this was true, what did that make her cold-hearted choice for this man? She had been played for a complete fool by two different men. One she had discarded like trash, the other she had treasured like a jewel. It turned out one was a god she couldn't afford to offend, and the other was a snake poised to deliver a fatal bite. The police paid no mind to her breakdown. They soon apprehended Julian at his apartment. Veronica saw him again outside an interrogation room at the police station. He was in handcuffs, his face stripped of its usual soft, pitiable expression, leaving only a mask of snarling madness. When he saw Veronica, he lunged at her like a wild animal, held back by two officers. "Veronica, you useless bitch," he shrieked, his voice piercing. "I did all this for you, why didn't you protect me? You promised you would protect me for life." Veronica looked at his contorted face, feeling nothing but endless disgust and exhaustion. "Why did you do it?" she asked hoarsely. At her question, Julian laughed manically. "Why? Because I love you. I've loved you for years. But what did you do? You married that man, Leo King, but you wouldn't be with me. I had to destroy him. I had to make you lose everything so you would have to rely on me, and then you would be mine forever." His laughter echoed eerily in the empty hallway. "But I never thought." His tone shifted, his eyes filling with venom. "I never thought that loser Leo King had such powerful backing. And I never thought you, Veronica Vance, would be so damn useless you couldn't even save your own company." As the police dragged him away, he looked back, his gaze fixed on Veronica with a venomous glare. "You ruined me, Veronica," he screamed. "You gave me the illusion that I could take him down. You made me think that if I just got rid of him, I could have everything. It's your fault." Veronica stood frozen, as if struck by lightning. Did I ruin him? If it weren't for my constant indulgence and favoritism, if I hadn't given him the impression that he was more important than Leo, would he have dared to be so reckless? I had personally fed the snake that bit me. Payback. This was all payback. After leaving the police station, Veronica wandered the city streets like a ghost. Dusk fell, and the city lights began to glow. The city she once thought was hers now seemed alien and cold. Every passerby's face was filled with a happiness that had nothing to do with her. She finally stopped at a public payphone. She knew this was her last chance. She took out a coin and, with trembling hands, dialed the number she knew by heart. My number. This time, the call went through. The dial tone, ring, ring, echoed in her ear, each sound like a blade slicing her heart. Just as she thought it would go to voicemail, someone picked up. "Hello?" It was my voice, calm and distant, devoid of any emotion, as if I were answering a call from a stranger. "Leo," Veronica began, her voice a raw, broken whisper. "It's me." There was a brief silence on the other end. "Is there something you need, Ms. Vance?" Ms. Vance. The title was an invisible knife, severing her last thread of hope. "Leo, I know I was wrong. Her voice was thick with pain and regret. I was so wrong. I shouldn't have chosen Julian. I shouldn't have frozen your cards. I shouldn't have let you. Will you come back? We can start over. I'll give you everything. Anything, just please come back. She rambled on, confessing and begging like a drowning person clinging to a piece of driftwood. On the other end, I listened quietly without interruption or response. When she finally fell silent, I spoke slowly, my voice still as placid as a stagnant pool of water. Ms. Vance, the moment you chose to use that medicine and my assets to stabilize your stock, your account with me was closed. Closed. So precise and so cruel. No, that's not it, Leo. Veronica made a final, desperate attempt. The one I love is you. It's always been you. Julian, he was just… The person you love isn't me. I interrupted her gently. You love yourself. You love being on top, being in control. You loved the business value I brought you, and you loved how Julian fed your cheap savior complex. Veronica, you have never truly loved anyone but yourself. Every word I spoke was a scalpel, precisely dissecting her phony exterior and exposing the selfish, ugly core within. She couldn't argue because everything I said was true. Give me one more chance, she pleaded weakly. Just one more. I let out a soft laugh. Veronica, what makes you think you have anything left to bargain with? I ended the call then, decisively, but just before hanging up, as if I just remembered something, I added one final sentence, a sentence designed to cast her into the deepest circle of hell. Oh, by the way, the head of your company's bankruptcy liquidation team? That would be Jax. A crowd milled around the base of the Vance Industries headquarters. The once stylish white-collar workers now wore worried expressions, standing in long lines to collect their severance pay. Kylan Group's takeover had been swift and clean, leaving no room for false hope. Veronica stood across the street, dazed, watching the building she had poured 10 years of her life into. It had been her kingdom, her temple, and now she didn't even have the right to set foot inside. She saw workers high above, using cutting torches to slice through the enormous gilded letters on the roof, Vance Industries. Sparks flew, a silent funeral for her fallen empire. She watched as her former employees collected their pay and left in small groups, none of them looking back at her. Abandoned by all, a fallen tree scattering the monkeys. Phrases she thought only existed in books were now her reality. Just then, a black Rolls-Royce Phantom with a priceless license plate pulled up silently at the curb nearby. A door opened, and a figure in a black trench coat stepped out. It was Jax. He didn't look at Veronica. He walked around to the other side of the car and opened the door for someone else. My figure came into Veronica's view. I was wearing a well-tailored beige suit, my hair impeccably styled, a polite smile on my face. I was no longer the timid husband who had tiptoed around her, his eyes always holding a hint of pleading. The confidence and detachment in my expression were an invisible wall, locking her out of my world forever. The Rolls-Royce started smoothly and pulled away. Veronica stood on the sidewalk, watching the car carry me, and a future she could never touch, disappear into the traffic. She remembered the emergency room, where she had pronounced a death sentence on both my life and my fortune. She remembered the summit, where Jax had coldly declared, "You're not worthy." She remembered my final, decisive words on the phone. Your account with me was closed. It had all been foretold. It was just that she, blinded by her own arrogance, had never seen it. Crash. The last letter of Vance Industries was cut from the roof and fell with a deafening screech of metal, shattering into pieces on the ground below. Veronica's body jolted with the sound, as if the last ounce of her strength had been ripped away. She slumped against the wall behind her. A light, drizzling rain began to fall, the cold drops hitting her face, making it impossible to tell what was rain and what was tears. A week later, in the grand lobby of the former Vance Industries headquarters, now renamed the Kylan Global Center, a highly anticipated press conference was underway. The cameras of hundreds of the world's top media outlets were aimed at the main stage. Kylan Group, the capital behemoth that had long been shrouded in mystery, was about to make its first official public appearance. Veronica, like a ghost, blended into the throng of journalists. She wore a cheap jacket, her hair was a mess, and her face was gaunt, a stark contrast to the polished media professionals around her. No one recognized the haggard woman as the CEO who, just a week ago, had commanded this very building. She had come for one reason only, to see me one last time. Only after losing everything did she morbidly realize that her feelings for me might not have been pure utility. It was a deep-seated possessiveness, a dependency she had never acknowledged. And now, she just wanted to see with her own eyes what, exactly, she had lost. The press conference began. Amid a storm of flashing lights, Jax and I walked onto the stage. I was still in the sharp beige suit, poised and elegant. The QA session began. A bold financial reporter posed a question to me. Mr. King, as a core member of Kylan Group and the ex-husband of Vance Industries founder, how would you comment on your ex-wife, Ms. Veronica Vance? The entire room's focus instantly shifted to me. Veronica's heart leaped into her throat. She was both terrified and pathologically eager to hear what I would say about her. I picked up the microphone, a polite smile on my face, and spoke slowly. Regarding Ms. Vance, I believe the market has already delivered the most impartial verdict. I have nothing to add. It was a casual dismissal, yet every word was a dagger to the heart. There was no accusation, no resentment, only complete and utter disregard.